Tsavo Reserve, mid-morning. The air was dry and sharp, humming faintly with cicadas as the sun climbed higher, casting shallow shadows across the brittle scrub. Ranger Kamau had walked this route hundreds of times. His boots had memorized the cracks in the soil, the grooves where buffalo herds sometimes passed, and the patches where green still dared to cling. But today his footsteps slowed. Something was off. Not the absence of movement, which was normal in the heat, but the shape of stillness itself, thicker, heavier. It was just beyond the yellowed fringe of thorn brush, a slump of gray too small to be an adult but too still to be safe. As he rounded the dry bend, the form became clear. A young elephant calf lay collapsed on his side, one leg twisted slightly beneath him, the other stretched as if he had fallen mid-step. Dust clung to his skin in uneven layers, coating the folds of his flank and the creases behind his ears. His belly rose and fell in shallow waves, each breath a visible effort. The ground beneath him was damp where he had drooled, where his sides had sweated, but the earth was drying fast. Nearby, 3 paces off, the mother stood, silent, motionless, as if carved from the very rock and root of the land itself. Her trunk hung limp, curling occasionally just above the tips of her tusks, not reaching out, not probing the air. She did not trumpet. Her ears did not flap. She made no move toward Kamau, though she must have seen him approach. Instead, she stood anchored, her massive weight holding tension in the space between grief and refusal. Kamau paused, body half-turned, assessing not just the calf's condition, but the quiet body language of the mother. In the reserve, mothers defended their calves fiercely. They circled, stamped, trumpeted, and lunged. This one did none of those things. Her front right foot shifted once, half a step, then returned. Her breath moved in and out slowly, through her trunk in a rhythm that spoke not of fear, but fatigue. Kamau raised his binoculars, scanning the calf first for signs of trauma. No wound, no gash, no blood. But there was something unnatural about the way the calf's limbs rested. Loose, unengaged. The ear twitched once, then lay still again. His eye was half open, glassy but wet, with a faint glisten at the corner, as though the dust had mixed with a tear. The skin along his rib cage was pulled taut, his ribs too visible, and his shoulder blades pronounced. Kamau could see where the muscle had weakened. This wasn't a recent fall. This had been coming on for days, maybe longer. He took a step forward, slow and deliberate. The mother's head tilted slightly, but she didn't move. That, too, was a message. Not submission. Elephants did not submit, but a kind of relinquishing. Kamau knew what he was seeing, though it made his chest tighten. He had seen it before in water-starved zebras, in elderly buffalo, and in orphaned lion cubs. The moment when a parent's instinct, so deeply carved into the bones, flickered beneath the weight of reality. She was still here, but her stillness was no longer defensive. It was the silence of knowing. Kamau crouched beside the calf now, careful not to touch, just observing. The trunk rose a few inches, trembled, then dropped. The breath that came next was ragged. There was no visible wound, but heat exhaustion could act like poison in the young. Dehydration, infection, weakness, all of them invisible killers. He took out the small radio clipped to his shoulder. One calf down, breathing shallowly, no predator activity, mother nearby, non-aggressive. His voice was quiet but steady. He didn't need to add the unspoken part, the part the team would hear anyway. It might already be too late. As he waited for the soft crackle of response, Kamau kept his eyes on the mother. She hadn't turned. Her back leg shifted slightly, and a puff of dust rose and fell at her heel. Her body was angled toward the calf, but her trunk rested now across her own chest, not touching, not reaching. She was letting go, slowly, but not leaving. Not yet. The radio buzzed back. They would dispatch a small team and bring fluids, shade netting, and hydration packs. Estimated arrival, 45 minutes. Kamau exhaled through his teeth, then looked at the sky. 45 minutes under this sun was too long. Already the calf's eyes were beginning to roll slightly, unfocused. Kamau moved into the calf's line of sight, careful to keep his posture open. He didn't speak, not yet. The calf's ear flopped once more, then stilled. If he could not rise before the peak sun, his organs would begin to fail. The mother must have known. Elephants had a way of sensing when a herd member was slipping beyond the threshold of return. But what haunted Kamau more was the question. How long had she waited before stopping here? How many kilometers had she walked beside this weakening child, each step heavier than the last, until finally the calf had folded at her feet? The mother exhaled again, softer this time. Her head bowed slightly, and still she did not come closer. Kamau slowly removed his canvas pack, pulling out a flask. He uncapped it and poured a small stream of water into his hand. The calf's trunk twitched again at the scent, but he made no move to lift his head. Kamau whispered, "Easy, little one. You're not alone." His voice was more breath than sound, absorbed by the dust around them. He knew he couldn't force hydration. Not yet. Not like this. All he could do was wait and shield the calf's body with his own until help arrived. Behind him, the mother's feet stirred. She took 2 slow steps forward, then paused. Her shadow crept over the calf's flank, long and solid. Kamau stayed still. No movement, no challenge, no sound. The moment balanced there like a breath before collapse. 3 lives suspended beneath a sun that showed no mercy. If the calf could not drink soon, he would not see another morning. If the mother walked away, she would not return. And if Kamau moved too quickly, the fragile stillness they had settled into could shatter. Everything now hinged on time and quiet and breath. Nothing more, nothing less. The heat had deepened as the sun climbed higher, pressing into the backs of the rangers and flattening the color of the land into a dull haze. Kamau remained still beside the calf, whose breathing had slowed, becoming more fragile, each rise of the rib cage shallower than the last. The other rangers had arrived, approaching quietly on foot, their presence careful and deliberate. No radios cracked, no voices rose. They understood that the quiet here was not just a silence, but something ceremonial, something they were now stepping into. The mother, who had not moved for so long, finally shifted. Slowly she began to walk, not away, but in a broad, deliberate arc around the calf. Her footsteps were heavy but measured, not hurried. There was no threat in her motion, but there was tension, a kind of unspoken weight in each step, a rhythm that spoke not of defense but of farewell. She moved as though the circle itself had meaning, as though she needed to draw a boundary around her child, not to keep others out, but to mark what had happened here, what might happen still. Her trunk hung low, barely brushing the ground. It didn't reach for the calf. It didn't probe the air. Her ears, wide and sun-worn, held stiff at her sides, not flapping to cool her, but extended in a posture that kept her rooted in alertness. She was not collapsing into grief, but she was holding it inside her body, carrying it in her deliberate motion, in the arc of her orbit. In the dust she stirred. Kamau remained still, crouched low near the calf's head, careful not to make sudden movements. His eyes followed the mother, his breathing slow to match the space she was setting with her motion. The others kept back, waiting at the edge of the scrub. There would be no rush, no show of urgency that might push her toward uncertainty or alarm. The circle she walked grew tighter with each rotation. Her eyes never left the calf. Her awareness did not shift to the humans. It remained fixed, tethered. Kamau recognized the signs. He had seen it once before, years ago, when a matriarch had lost a newborn during a drought. The same slow turns, the same still ears, the same dragging trunk. Elephants do not perform grief, but they carry it in their movement, their silence, and their refusal to leave. This mother was not defending her calf anymore, she was marking the time. Around the third full circle, Elena, one of the younger rangers, leaned slightly toward Kamau from a safe distance and whispered, "She knows." Kamau didn't answer. The air between them was thick with the truth of it. This was not panic. This was not confusion. This was acceptance beginning to settle like dust over skin. The calf groaned softly, a breathless, raspy sound that caused the mother to stop in her tracks. Her ears flicked once. Her trunk lifted just slightly, then lowered again. She remained frozen for a long moment, head turned slightly, eyes fixed. Then, slowly, she resumed her walk, but this time she made only half a circle before stopping again, her body now directly opposite Kamau. The calf's sides barely moved. Flies had begun to gather around his mouth and eyes. Kamau took another slow step forward. The mother did not react. That, too, was a sign. He poured a small stream of water into his hand and held it out, letting it fall near the calf's mouth. The calf's trunk twitched, but it didn't rise. His body was too tired now, too dry. The small sign of life was all that remained. If fluids weren't administered soon, his internal organs would begin to shut down. They were nearing the edge of irreversible failure. Kamau didn't speak, but his silence was a tension the others felt clearly. Everyone knew the risk. The vet team had been notified, but they were still en route. There could be no intervention until they arrived, no attempt to lift or hydrate forcefully, no tranquilizer administered without the right team and protocol. They had minutes, maybe less, and still the mother did not move. She held her position opposite Kamau, not aggressive, not yielding, but present, completely, powerfully present. Her gaze flicked between the calf and the ranger, but it didn't hold a challenge. It held something else. Not permission, not trust, but the raw gravity of a mother who had done all she could and was now choosing to stand with her child, whether help came or not. Kamau didn't dare break the stillness. Every movement mattered now. One wrong step could push her toward resistance, but every delay threatened the calf's life. The stakes hung in perfect balance. If they waited too long, the calf would die. If they moved too soon, the mother might block them, or worse, force the team to retreat altogether. Kamau looked down at the calf again, watching for even the slightest sign of awareness, a flick of the ear, a flutter of breath, a movement of the trunk, but nothing came. The sun bore down harder now, and the calf's skin had begun to dry and crack at the edges of his mouth. The mother made one final motion. She lowered her trunk and let it hover above her child, not touching, not nudging, just resting in the air like a thread pulled taut. Then she lifted it again, curled it inward, and stood completely still. No breath of air moved through the brush. The land felt suspended, caught in a stillness deeper than silence. Kamau knew then that she had made her decision. She would not interfere, but she would not step aside. Whatever came next, she would witness it. The team waited, holding position. There was nothing else to do but wait for the vet, wait for a sign, wait for breath. In that long stretch of motionless heat, only the wind finally moved, lifting a veil of dust into the space between them all. And still she stayed. Still she watched. Still she waited. Kamau's movements had slowed to a rhythm shaped by the silence around him, each step a careful conversation with the air, with the dust, and with the towering presence of the mother elephant standing only feet away. The calf lay still, his body crumpled in the heat, eyes dulled to a distant shimmer, breath shallow and broken. Kamau's hands moved with the soft patience learnt over years, nothing sudden, nothing fast. He knelt beside the calf again, lowering himself into the space where the animal's frail life still clung to the earth. His voice, low and nearly swallowed by the breeze, offered the smallest murmur. "It's okay, little one." It wasn't meant as comfort in the human sense. It was acknowledgement, a tether cast gently between presence and pain. The air hung thick, not only with heat, but also with waiting. The other rangers remained behind, out of sight but alert, holding their positions in the undergrowth, ready to act but under strict instruction not to disturb the fragile balance. Kamau poured a shallow pool of water into his palm and extended it toward the calf's mouth. There was no reaction. The calf's trunk twitched faintly, but his head did not lift, and the water slid unnoticed to the ground. The silence deepened, wrapping around them like a veil, until a sound, not loud, but different, broke gently into it. It wasn't from the calf. It was the shift of weight from the mother. She moved, slowly, almost reluctantly, her massive frame gliding forward one deliberate step, then another, until she stood just opposite Kamau. Her trunk rose slightly, curling halfway through its motion before lowering again, and then, without warning or fanfare, she extended it toward her calf. The gesture was not forceful. It was not even urgent. It was something quieter, contact without expectation. Her trunk hovered, then gently rested on the calf's shoulder, holding there in stillness. No pressure, no movement, just presence. Kamau watched, unmoving, his breath held for a moment without meaning to. The calf stirred, not dramatically but distinctly. His hind leg shifted through the dust, dragging only slightly, but enough to lift a wisp of dry soil into the air. The mother's trunk moved then, not away but along the calf's side, brushing upward in a slow motion that lingered, then pulled back with the same gentleness. And she did not walk away. She did not resume circling. She simply stood there, closer than before, her eyes steady on the space where her calf lay and the man crouched beside him. In that single moment, something passed between species. Not permission, not trust in the full sense, but something adjacent to understanding. Kamau didn't move to speak again. He didn't need to. He watched the calf's side rise once more, still shallow, still uneven, but higher than before. The weak muscles beneath the thick, wrinkled skin found a flicker of energy, drawn not from water, not from intervention, but from touch. It was not a rescue. Not yet, but it was a signal. Kamau raised his hand slightly toward the rangers behind him, a gesture not to approach but to wait. The mother had offered the most that could be hoped for in such a space. She had not challenged his presence. She had touched her calf, and now she was watching. Kamau poured another stream of water near the calf's lips. A droplet reached the edge of his mouth and clung there before sinking slowly into the cracked skin. The trunk flinched again. Not a full movement, not even a lift, but another twitch, more deliberate than before. Kamau stayed still. The moment was still too thin to hold weight. Every breath the calf drew came with risk. Every second that passed without intervention drew the line tighter between survival and loss. The vet team was minutes out now, but those minutes stretched painfully long against the measure of a calf's fading pulse. The mother exhaled through her trunk, a long, low sound with no anger in it. Just exhaustion, or acceptance, or both. Her body shifted slightly so that the edge of her shadow fell more fully across the calf's body. A fragile kind of shade that did little to cool but everything to shelter. Kamau watched her eyes, dark, fixed, and unreadable in the way only elephants can be. And yet, the lack of threat in her posture spoke volumes. He was allowed to stay. Nothing more, nothing less. Behind him, the wind picked up slightly, dragging dry leaves across the dirt and sending a few spiraling into the grass. The team at the edge of the scrub remained still, their outlines barely visible, waiting for the final signal. Kamau leaned closer, just slightly, and this time he brushed the back of his fingers along the calf's ear, checking for temperature. Still hot, still dangerous, but he was alive. The calf's eye opened wider for a breath or two, then drifted closed again. The mother did not react to the touch. She watched. Kamau knew better than to read into it. This was not gratitude. It was not connected. It was the recognition that her child was still here, and that she could no longer do this alone. But she had not left. She had not turned away. In so many cases like this, a mother's choice to walk meant the end. Today, she had stayed. That alone shifted what was possible. It meant the team could act without force. It meant the calf had more time. Kamau looked to the horizon. Dust trailed faintly in the distance, vehicles drawing near. Help was coming, and the mother hadn't blocked them. She had touched him. She had stayed. And now, in the heat and the hush of that delicate moment, Kamau knelt beside the calf, the mother across from him, and a narrow thread of possibility was still intact between them. The calf's body shifted again, not with strength but with the loose tremble of something fading. A low groan passed through his throat, barely formed, a sound closer to air than voice. His limbs, once drawn in beneath him with instinctive caution, now seemed to drift outward slightly, surrendering to the soil, the edge of his ear folded under its own weight, limp against the dust. For a long moment there was no movement at all. Then, just ahead of him, the mother changed her stance. Slowly, her feet adjusted their grip on the hard ground. Her head dipped once, not low enough to touch, not low enough to comfort, but enough to mark the moment, then lifted again. Her trunk curled halfway around itself and then loosened. She stepped back. Not far, just 2 steps, but they were deliberate, measured. Kamau watched as she did it again. Another step back, this time turning her body away from the calf, her great frame angling slightly toward the horizon. The movement wasn't frantic. It wasn't fearful. It was slow, intentional, a choice. And he understood then that what she was doing wasn't driven by confusion or alarm. It was a quiet shift, the turning of a maternal instinct from protection to release. Elephants rarely walk away from their young. Even in illness, even in death, they often linger. But sometimes, when the herd has already moved on or when resources run dry, there comes a point where a mother must weigh the need to stay against the call to survive. And though the herd was nowhere in sight, Kamau could feel the pressure in her movement. She had waited, she had circled, she had touched him, she had stayed longer than most would. But now the weight of instinct was tipping. Not from cruelty or detachment, but from the terrible wisdom of the wild. If she lingered much longer, she too would grow weaker. She knew the odds. And so did he. The calf's breath rattled once more, his flanks barely lifting. Flies gathered around his mouth, unbothered by motion. The sun was high now, and the soil radiated heat like a second sky beneath them. Still crouched beside the calf, Kamau could feel it pressing upward through his knees. The ranger turned his head slightly toward the mother, watching her pause. She looked over her shoulder. That was the part that stayed with him. The look, not at him, not at the team still waiting in the distance, but at her child. It lasted only a second before she stepped again, the distance between them now twice what it had been moments ago. The decision was clear. She was leaving. Not in haste, not in fear, but in the way that only an animal who has no more choices can. Kamau didn't rise. He didn't shout. His hand stayed steady over the calf's head, casting the smallest shadow. The vet team were minutes out, but they hadn't arrived. The window between intervention and finality was narrowing. And yet, as he watched her retreat, something inside him refused to frame this moment as failure. This was not abandonment. This was survival passing from one generation to another, in a place where only the strongest make it to the next season. She stopped once more. Now, several strides away, her silhouette blurred slightly in the rising heat. She didn't turn back again. She remained there, half facing the plain, her body pulled between memory and necessity. Kamau dipped the corner of a cloth into the last of his canteen water and pressed it gently along the calf's temple. The skin was too hot. The veins beneath it are too still. But the calf didn't flinch. Somewhere in that contact, there was still life. And where there was life, there was responsibility. A ranger's duty in these moments wasn't to rewrite nature, it was to extend what it offered, sometimes by minutes, sometimes more, but always with respect. He didn't speak again. There was nothing more to say. The calf moaned once, a dry, uneven sound, his head lolling slightly toward the shade of Kamau's shoulder. Behind them, a low hum of engines broke the stillness. Dust lifted from the road, and the soft rhythm of approaching wheels stirred the air. The vet team was almost here. If the mother chose to leave now, they wouldn't stop her, but Kamau kept one eye on the calf and the other on the blurred figure in the heat shimmer ahead. She hadn't moved again. Not yet. She was still watching, still close enough to hear. The calf's chest rose once more, uneven but real. He wasn't gone. Not yet. And as long as he remained, so would they. The line between survival and surrender was narrowing, but for now, no one was left behind. The hum of approaching tires had faded into stillness again, the dust from the departing vet vehicle already settling in soft layers along the dry trail. Kamau stood a few feet from the calf now, the hydration line taped gently to its ear, fluids moving drop by drop through the narrow tube. The young elephant remained lying on his side, breath shallow but present, each rise of his rib cage confirming what little progress had been made. The mother had not come closer again. After her slow retreat earlier, she had remained at a distance, standing with the same unwavering posture, her body facing open land. The wind carried her scent back toward the calf, and perhaps he still knew she was near. But the distance between them had become more than just space. It had become time measured in instincts, hers telling her that this chapter was closing. She had waited. She had touched. She had stood longer than many would. But now her body shifted one last time, and the shift carried weight. She turned her head slightly, not enough to return, just enough for a backward glance. One eye, quiet and unreadable, lingered in the direction of her calf. There was no call, no sound at all. She simply looked, and then she turned away. Her body pivoted fully now, her feet aligning with the long path ahead, and with a deep, measured exhale, she began to walk. The steps were not hurried. There was no tension in her stride. Each movement carried the calm gravity of a decision already lived through, and as she moved, the air behind her seemed to fall quieter still, as if even the land had recognized the weight of that choice. From the far edge of the reserve, the shapes of the herd emerged, slow-moving, broad-backed figures returning from higher ground where the drought's edge hadn't yet reached. Whether she had called to them earlier, or whether they had simply come back on instinct, it didn't matter now. One by one, they appeared, then followed. There was no gathering around the calf, no farewell. They did not pause. Their trunks stayed low, brushing grass or swinging in rhythm. The matriarch passed first, then a younger bull, and a string of juveniles just beyond adolescence. They were not rushing. They were not confused. They were simply leaving, because survival asked them to. The mother blended into their line without needing to assert herself. She slipped into step with the rest, her trunk folding loosely across her tusk. The sun glinted faintly off her back as she passed into the open land. Kamau did not move. He kept one hand near the calf's ear, gently steadying the hydration line. The vet's soft instruction had been clear. Let the fluid work, give him time, do not stimulate him too early. And so they waited. But now, with the herd moving away, Kamau could feel the calf's absence settling in the air around him. Not his physical absence, but the emotional one left by the departure of his mother. She had chosen to go, and in that choice was a kind of mercy. Though it didn't look like it, it was nature doing what it had always done, carving decisions into silence, asking mothers to bear what no one else could. Her leaving did not mean she stopped caring. It meant she had given everything she could. The calf stirred slightly under Kamau's hand. His eye fluttered open for a second, then closed again. His breath shivered against the dust. The shadow that had once been his mother's had already faded from his side. All that remained now was sun, wind, and the slow work of science and care. The line of elephants continued moving, their silhouettes growing smaller and softer until they merged with the far horizon where the land curved into heat. Kamau watched them until they vanished entirely. In the space left behind, the calf's breath remained, light but rhythmic, stubborn in its refusal to stop. And though his body lay where it had always been, something had changed. He was no longer tethered to the great form that had once protected him. Now he was tethered only to what the humans could offer: hydration, shade, time. The wind passed through the grass again, lifting it gently as if brushing the calf's skin. Kamau looked once more toward the empty plain, then lowered his gaze. He didn't speak. The mother had said everything she needed to without sound. And now the work left was not about miracles, but moments. Each breath the calf took marking another one earned. The herd was gone, but the calf remained, and sometimes that was enough. Kamau shifted back to his knees beside the calf's body, the air dense with silence and heat. The others had stayed behind, giving him space as they waited for the next step from the vet team. But there was no confusion in his posture, no rush. Every movement he made now was born of discipline, not habit, not hope. He opened the kit slowly, pulling out the pulse oximeter and placing it just beneath the flap of the calf's ear. The device was small, built for young elephants, but even then its reading lagged. The numbers, once they appeared, confirmed what he already saw in the animal's breathing. The calf was alive, but only just. The pulse was erratic, too slow, too soft, and that slowness wasn't coming from trauma. No blood pooled beneath him, no fractures along the spine. The collapse hadn't been violent. It had been gradual, hidden in plain sight until the final hour. Kamau ran his hands lightly over the calf's body, watching for swelling or sensitivity. There was none. The belly, though distended slightly, didn't show signs of bloat or obstruction. What he found instead was a hollowness beneath the skin, dehydration so deep it had drawn moisture away from the muscles, leaving them flat and unresponsive. The ears, which had twitched earlier, now hung cold to the touch. The tip of the trunk was caked with dust and uncurled. The calf's eyes were closed, but his lashes fluttered at uneven intervals, each breath shallow and unpredictable. There was no fever, but there was no strength either. Kamau looked toward the horizon again. The dust from the retreating herd now entirely settled. The calf's mother was gone, and with her, the last tether to a body that had fed, protected, and sheltered this young elephant through his first months of life. Now, alone and on the edge of collapse, the calf's body was shutting down, not because of injury, but because of the slow, compounding cruelty of heat, infection, and thirst. Kamau uncapped the hydration line and adjusted the rate. The vet had started it moments before leaving for the nearby station, promising to return once other emergency supplies had arrived. For now, all Kamau could do was monitor, watch, and wait. A drop of saline rolled through the line and vanished beneath a taped patch of skin near the calf's ear. Another followed. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The ground beneath them was warm, the type of heat that rises in waves and doesn't cool until long after sunset. Flies hovered again around the calf's mouth. Kamau wiped them gently away. There were no calls from the trees, no bird chatter overhead. Even the wind had slowed. He leaned close again, listening to the breath. It caught once, then continued. Still there. Barely. Still there. "Almost there, little one," Kamau whispered, barely loud enough for himself to hear. The calf didn't move. His flank rose again, just slightly. Kamau didn't need to check again to know the stakes were narrowing. Without visible trauma, the body's quiet deterioration was harder to track. But the result was the same. If fluids didn't take hold soon, if organ systems had already begun to fail, there would be no coming back. No second attempt. Every moment they waited was a gamble against time, one the calf could not afford to lose. But Kamau knew better than to rush. Everything had to be slow now, gentle, measured. Rushing a collapsed elephant, even one this young, could drive the heart faster than it could manage, could tip the balance from struggling to gone. The sun pressed harder against the land. Kamau adjusted the cloth shade just slightly over the calf's head. The makeshift shelter barely held against the heat, but it was better than nothing. Nearby, the sound of water sloshed gently in the backup canister. They wouldn't drench him. Shock cooling was dangerous, but they could moisten the trunk and ears if he remained stable. A lizard darted across the ranger's boot and paused. Kamau didn't move. The line of tension between survival and loss ran too tight to allow for distraction. He leaned back again, watching the calf's rib cage move. One breath. A pause. Another, still enough to stay. The weight of the mother's absence returned in the quiet. Her touch had lingered only for a moment, but the silence she left behind now sat heavy in the air. Kamau had seen it before. Young ones left behind by mothers forced to choose between one life and many. The wild made no room for grief. It made room only for survival. But here, in this space carved out by human hands and compassion, the rules were allowed to bend. Just a little. Just long enough. A breeze passed lightly through the brush, bending the grass in one smooth wave, and Kamau turned his head slightly toward it. Still no movement from the calf. But no stillness either. The fluid continued to drip. The breath still came, and though weak, the pulse had not stopped. Not yet. The afternoon had stretched thin, weighed down by heat and quiet urgency. The wind had gone still, and the trees stood motionless in the distance, as if listening. Kamau didn't speak as the rest of the team stepped in around him, moving carefully, their gestures practiced, their pace steady. The vet returned without words, his face unreadable but focused, his hands already reaching for the cooler box that held what they had managed to gather. They had no access to full lab work or diagnostics out here, no time to wait on perfect answers. All they had was the calf's breath, faint as it was, and the narrow corridor of chance held open by saline and shade. A fresh hydration pack was hung from the temporary pole they'd driven into the ground. The old line was adjusted, its drip sped by the vet's careful hands. A second ranger unfurled the silver-backed shade cloth, angling it from the vehicle roof to cover the calf's torso. The material shimmered faintly in the light, not beautiful but useful, and that was all they needed now. Kamau dampened a strip of clean cloth and placed it along the calf's ear, then again along the edge of his trunk, just at the ridge where the dust had settled thick. The calf didn't flinch. His skin was warm, but no longer burning. That was a start. Elena crouched beside the back leg and pressed lightly for a response, muscle tone soft but not completely limp. They had seen worse. They had lost animals in better condition, too. There were no guarantees here. The vet knelt near the rib cage, one hand placed softly just behind the front limb, his head tilted, listening not with instruments, but with practiced quiet. The breath came, slower than ideal, but no longer gasping, still shallow, still unreliable. But something inside had steadied, if only slightly. No one said it aloud, but they all knew. This was the turning point, not a moment of triumph, just the fragile, flickering space between collapse and return. Kamau reached again for the cloth and touched it once more to the calf's lip. This time, the lip twitched. Barely. A response. Then, just beneath that twitch, a blink. The calf's eyelid moved, not fully open, not focused, but a reaction. Kamau leaned in, just a fraction closer. He waited. A breath came, then a pause, then another. Still shallow, still spaced too far apart. But it was there. A beat, then another blink. The vet murmured softly, not quite words, just the low reassurance of someone who's been here before. He didn't need to explain what they all understood. If hydration held, and if the organ systems hadn't already passed the point of failure, this calf had a chance. Not a certainty, but a chance. Time, for now, was the most precious thing they could give. Time and shade. Time and hydration. Time and silence. The herd was gone. The mother, already too far to return, would not come back. That absence would never be filled. But the calf was not alone now. He was surrounded by hands that knew how to wait, how to act slowly, and how to carry hope without clinging to it. The sun had begun its slow descent across the western sky, its light softening along the tops of the grasses. The silver cloth fluttered lightly in the faintest stir of breeze. A second hydration pack was readied. If he responded more clearly soon, they would consider protein supplements. For now, they waited. Kamau did not stand. He remained crouched beside the calf, his presence still, his expression quiet. The moment required nothing else. No words, no movement, just attention. The calf's flank rose again. A shiver passed through the back leg. The eye blinked once more, and beneath the line of tubing taped to the ear, a single drop of fluid entered the bloodstream. One drop, one moment, one chance. That was all it took to begin again. The light returned slowly, seeping across the dry ground in pale threads, softening the harsh lines the sun had etched the day before. The grasses near the edge of the clearing glistened with the faint trace of dew, and the world around the calf seemed to hold its breath. He had not moved much through the night. His body had remained still under the shade cloth, the drip of hydration continuing with quiet rhythm, and the rangers, working in shifts, had watched without speaking. Every rise of his flank had been counted, every blink noted, and now, as the first blush of day settled across the reserve, the calf shifted again, but this time with more purpose. His front leg bent slowly, drawing toward his body, not in pain, but in instinct. The other followed. A tremble passed along his side, subtle and brief, like wind through low grass. Kamau stood nearby, hands resting at his sides, his eyes fixed on the movement. There was no call to the others, no signal yet. He watched. The calf's head lifted slightly. His eyes blinked, once, then again. Not confused, not panicked, just slow, searching. The skin beneath his eyes was still dry, the corners cracked, but there was something else now. Tension in the muscles, a readiness not seen before. Kamau moved closer and knelt down, checking the line, checking the breath. The numbers had held through the night. Respiration was steadier now, still shallow but no longer erratic. The calf's ear flicked once, weakly, and then settled. Kamau reached for the cloth and pressed a little coolness to the calf's temple. The calf leaned into it, a barely perceptible motion that felt, in that moment, like the start of a return. There was no vocalization, no sound from him. Just breath, and the faint settling of limbs shifting beneath him. The vet joined quietly, crouching on the other side, watching the position of the limbs and checking the reflexes near the spine. "Let him take his time," he murmured, more to the morning than to anyone in particular. And they did. The landscape around them slowly brightened. Shadows lifting off the brush and earth. The wind moved again through the tops of the trees, carrying with it the first warmth of day. Then, without warning, the calf tucked his legs closer and rolled partway to his chest. He stayed there, trembling with the effort, eyes closing again as the strain caught up with him. Kamau reached gently to steady the line near the ear and whispered, "You're almost there." It was enough. Not instruction, not encouragement, just presence. The calf didn't rise, but he didn't fold back either. He stayed upright, however briefly, and rested in the stillness. And then Elena, standing a little farther off, turned her head toward the ridge. Her voice was quiet. "There's something up there." Kamau followed her gaze, scanning the slope just above the clearing. The light hadn't reached it fully, but a form stood there, tall and unmoving, half-shadowed in morning mist. The shape was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, curved back, ears motionless but wide. The mother. She stood alone, not flanked by the herd, not moving closer, just watching. Her body faced downhill, her feet rooted just behind the rise. She had returned not with ceremony, not with sound, but with a kind of stillness that held everything. Kamau didn't move. No one did. They let her stay in that silence, her presence resting on the scene like mist itself. She made no approach. She didn't call. She simply stood where the sky met land, where dust met air, and watched the child she had once chosen to leave. There was no way to know how long she'd been there. Perhaps she had walked through the dark. Perhaps she had never gone far. But now, with the calf breathing stronger and the sun pulling soft gold across the ridge, she remained. The calf, still resting on his chest, lifted his head again. His eyes blinked. They did not seek her out, but they looked in her direction. He didn't rise. He didn't call, but his ears moved, faint and deliberate, as if responding to a current only he could feel. The vet leaned back on his heels and Kamau stood slowly. They would not interfere now. The next steps were not theirs to lead. Behind them, the grass rustled gently in the wind, and the day began. On the ridge, the mother stayed still, her outline sharp against the sky. No sound passed between them, but nothing more needed to be said.